So my dad's grandfather and grandmother on one side, and grandfather and grandmother on the other side were slaves. Grandpa George was 12 years old when Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. I am the great-granddaughter of slaves. Don't let anybody tell you this was all hundreds of years ago, because it wasn't. Beyond all that, when my mother was pregnant with me, they bombed our home. My mother had just watched late-night TV. She got up, she said an angel awakened her. She went into the bedroom, and 15 minutes later, the entire front of the house exploded. She got up to check on my sister who was in the crib. She walked into the dining room where the chimney had fallen through and there was a huge gaping hole, and she saw nothing but the sky. The police arrived, they roped off the area, and they told the neighbors that no one could come to see my mother. Well, thank God there was this strong black woman named Mrs. Arthur Mae Norris who strided up the street. She looked at the police officer and she said, "Oh no, I'm going in there." She went in to take care of my mother. She cleared a place for my mother to sit down, and then she said, "You need to call your husband." So my dad and Martin Luther King, whom I knew as my Uncle Martin because he was my godfather, they had gone to Atlanta to create a whole new organization called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. People decided to bomb our home because the Montgomery bus boycott had come to an end, a successful end, because for 381 days, black people refused to get on the bus. They decided to walk because we were hungry for our freedom. And you know, in California, when it rains, you all are scared to walk in the rain. Well, we walked in the rain, they walked in the snow, they walked in the blistering sunlight for our freedom. Because at that point, we had endured 244 years of slavery and then 100 years of Jim Crow segregation. That was 344 years of somebody having their foot on your neck, telling you that you were less than simply because of the color of your skin. We didn't choose our skin. Thank God I was born black. Thank God I am the descendant of slaves. But people decided that because of the color of our skin, we were less than. And that's just ridiculous. Anyway, so my mother gets on the phone and she's calling my dad at Granddaddy King's house. That's Uncle Martin's father's house. I knew him as Granddaddy because my grandfathers at that point had all died. Anyway, so Granddaddy wakes up Uncle Martin and he says to my dad, to Uncle Martin and to my dad, "Look what you all have done. You all have stirred up all these white people? Are you kidding me?" Because Granddaddy King was not a nonviolent man. So my mother's on the phone talking to my dad, and then they hear the second explosion through the phone. Arthur Mae Norris was standing on the front porch. She saw the reporter run to the policeman, and he said, "Where to?" And she said, he said, "Go to Ripley Street," which was my dad's church. So then they bombed my parents' home, they bombed my dad's church, they bombed Bell Street Church, they bombed Mount Olive Church, and then they bombed the home of Reverend Robert Gratz, a white minister of an all-black congregation. And they bombed his home because he was a bad white man. He was sympathetic to the needs of black people. So they thought they'd send him a message. But Uncle Martin wrote this book, Stride Towards Freedom. And when he wrote the book, Stride Towards Freedom, he wrote that with Ralph's home and church bombed, and at that point, Uncle Martin's father is yelling at them, they got down on their knees, and they asked the Lord to give them the strength to carry on. And that's what they did. They carried on. And then they went to Washington, and they had their first march on Washington. Then there were the Freedom Riders that came through. And then they went to Birmingham. And in Birmingham, you know, we couldn't even try clothing on in the department store. If you wanted to buy shoes, you'd take a string and you'd measure the bottom of your foot And when you got to the store, you'd put that string into the shoe. And this wasn't just for black people. This was for Asian people. This was for Latino people. This was for Native American people. That was for everybody who wasn't a white person. And it didn't make sense that we couldn't try clothing on. We couldn't try shoes on. I couldn't try a brassiere on. How was I going to know that it was going to fit? So what did we do? You didn't have to buy it, guesstimate, get home. If the shoe didn't fit, you put newspaper in the front of the shoe, or you put toilet paper in the front of the shoe. And the bra, you'd have to take it to the seamstress. And that's the way it was for us, and so we decided to boycott the stores at Easter. Easter's about to come now, and when Easter comes within the black community, we got to buy a big hat. We got to buy a brand new Easter suit. The child has to learn an Easter speech, and then you have an Easter basket. So Daddy and Uncle Mom decided they were going to boycott the stores. Well, the concerned clergy that were supposedly their advisors, the church people, the ministers, and the other thing I want you all to understand, the most segregated hour in America is 10:45 and 11 o'clock on Sunday morning when people go to church and worship God, worship Jesus with people that look just like them. Something's wrong with that. It shouldn't be the most segregated hour in America. It should be a time when we all come together and worship. Anyway, so they decided to boycott the stores. And when they boycotted the stores, people had a fit. They did the Good Friday March, and they're marching on Good Friday. The concerned clergy have come to their hotel room, and they said, please don't do this, please don't do this. I'll tell you, it was incredible. Uncle Mark and my dad listened to the men, and they said, listen, we understand what you all are trying to say for us to do, but we hear the voices of the young people, the teenagers that are at 16th Street Baptist Church. And so, I'm sorry, gentlemen, we got to march. And they walked up that sidewalk because we were hungry for our freedom. They were met by police. They were arrested and put into the jails. And in the jails, they were separated for the first time. And they were given the floor to sleep on. No mattress, no bed, no sheet, nothing but the dirty floor. But on teeny-weeny little pieces of toilet paper, Uncle Martin wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail. And the letter from the Birmingham jail, I want you to read it, is why we couldn't wait for our freedom. And then what the city of Birmingham did after that, they decided to turn the water hoses and the dogs on young children in a park, just like this, in the midst of downtown. The power of the water hose was so strong, it peeled the bark off of the tree. That was hate.